Cool, hey. Cool, hey. Hey everyone, welcome to number 2 in our new 360 Render Hangouts live streams. This is going to be a weekly hangout in our Discord, also streams to YouTube so people can access it afterwards. And we're just aiming at making a really good resource based on making the best 360 renders with our plugin for Unreal Engine. So we're really happy with the output that we're getting now. Really high res, really fast renders because it's using Unreal, and a load of awesome preview techniques. So we did a really quick start to finish how to render in the most basic sense from a level. So it would be great to dive in and refine it a little more this session. This one might be a little bit longer. If you're looking for a really quick start to finish, we've got that past video. That'll be the 360 Render Hangouts number 1. But this will be if you're looking at refining your animation and your camera settings based on a level sequence. We're going to use this Dark Ruins Megascans sample as a really good example for this. Show you some awesome preview techniques for VR and Dome using our NDI output as well. So let's start again with a new level sequence. Let's go out to, let's just pause any other cameras I've got in the level so we don't want them just rendering for no reason. And let's go out here. And this is a really good example of some kind of sequence where you might want to edit some settings on the fly. So let's pretend we're just starting from scratch. Drop in a new 360 camera. Now you might want to edit the exposure right off the bat. Bring this down. Just something like that, -2.5. And we're going to add a render target immediately, because this is going to give us this awesome 360 preview of everything that's going on. And we can pause and unpause rendering as we like, because this does impact the FPS, because we are just re-rendering a full 360 view of the whole scene. It's going to impact FPS. So let's go with equirectangular as our output format for now. This is useful for mono VR films, cinematic VR, but you know, we can have a little look at Dome as well, because this is suited for all immersive output types. So immersive media of all kinds you can make with this. So yeah, so we're making a sequence. This is a good example going into this tunnel, because you might want to change something like exposure on the fly. So I'm going to go cinematics, level sequence, and go level sequence 360. And just track this. So yeah, first keyframe for the transform, then I'm going to unpause the rendering while I preview this. I'll just move the sequence out of the screen for now, just so I can physically move forwards. Place a keyframe right inside this tunnel somewhere. Oh, and because I hadn't moved the playhead, just have to go back to that first point. So just drag all the way back out of here again. So yeah, let's go from here. Keyframe that point. So yeah, now we have A to point B. I think what I'll do is just turn off this 360 output by going viewport, preview, viewport, and output. We can turn that off so that we can just look through the kind of front face of the camera and get a bit better frames per second while we're doing that. So I'm just gonna refine this a little bit. Just make it a very simple, just forward movement. Now, basing a lot of this kind of movement, these thoughts on movement and what movement is good for VR, off of the MetaQuest guidelines. So this is a really great resource, which I'll link in the description, on starting out for filming in 360. So this is quite based on live action filming, but a lot of the workflows and guidelines totally carry through to 360 film as well, to CG, to rendered stuff as well. So skills and principles, case studies, a lot of this stuff is really great for 3D as well. It's a lot of stuff like, if you're viewing in VR, you don't want to control the rotation of a sequence too much, because the viewer has the ability to control that rotation. Anyway, they've got those 3 degrees of freedom. The roll, pitch, yaw, that's actually controlled by the headset. So if you're forcing that rotation too much, it can have like a nasty effect for the viewer, you know. So I'm just thinking with this sequence, just keep, for this first bit, I'm going to do absolutely no rotation. So we got that. Move it to the side a little. You know what, let's go in unlit so we can see what we're doing a bit more. A bit more of a sense of where we are here. So that's cool. Just transform there. Transform there. So yeah, simple going forwards. And then from previewing this has brought up another thing that's sort of part of these kind of guidelines, is to not to kind of move at a consistent rate and not move too fast. This is like mostly for VR. Again, if you feel you can push these rules a bit, then great, but as a general set of guidelines, it's sort of, this kind of fast movement is likely to be nauseating to the viewer. So we just want to take it really, really slow. So what I can do is just stretch out the sequence, probably by like 150%. Pull this out. And yeah, that's probably looking a bit more like something that's comfortable for a viewer. Cool, and then so what immediately comes up as you're doing something like this, where you're going into a tunnel, is that you might want to control the exposure based on the sequence as well. So inherently, the 360 cameras in general, they don't want to be doing auto exposure, because that throws up kind of issues for the 6 faces of the camera and how they blend together. So we've turned off auto exposure by default for this camera, just to save you the headache of having a lot of seams coming up based on Unreal's auto exposure kind of system. So we go to exposure here, we can see that it's set to manual. See if I can demonstrate. No, it won't let you take it off of this. So yeah, it's got to be manual. So therefore we kind of want to keyframe this. You can set a first keyframe by pressing this here, or you can also find it as part of the camera component by going to the child of the camera component, which is the capture component. This is where the exposure is controlled. So we can do a plus on the capture component. We can go post-process settings, And here I would probably just search exposure. Lens exposure, exposure compensation. And there we've got a keyframe there we can use. So from like here, we want the exposure to be where it was, and then here we want it to be raised. And here's a good time where we can then look at the preview again. So I like that this scene is generally quite dark, so I want to keep these real dark moments nice and dark still. But we can see, yeah, the exposure kind of raises as you're coming in. You might want to like pull it out a bit so it's a bit more gradual. Because, you know, in reality, your eye would take a minute to adapt to this level of exposure. So yeah, that's kind of looking okay. And then we can look at the whole preview if we want. Which you can view it as a render target in its own window here, or we could also go and check that preview output in viewport again. If we got all these icons, we can press G to go into game view, just to hide those. And then the good reason for looking at this whole output is you can see, are we overexposing this too much as we come in? I think, you know, judging by the fact that the direction of movement is forwards, I'm okay with this sort of getting a bit brighter as you get into the scene. So this is all kind of just guesswork at this point. We have like no idea how this is going to look in the headset. So what's great to demonstrate is that we can preview this in pretty much real time in the headset using our NDI output. So I've got one in the scene here, but I'll just delete it to send you, to show you again. If I can, I have to delete that. Yeah. Cool, so NDI sender manager is an actor we can bring into the scene, just dragging it into the viewport. This now looks for an array or a member in an array of render targets. So we can add that 360 render target that we made. We can call this OWL 360 NDI. It's going to make a standalone name automatically, and we can set it to be active. So now this, what's shown on this render target, is being sent out via NDI to any program that wants to receive it. So I can demonstrate this just on the NDI program itself. NDI Studio Monitor. It's just quite a good like debugging and testing tool for NDI. But we can see here we've got this OWL360 NDI, which we set as part of the NDI sender. So we've got this other little window that demonstrates the fact that if I keep it over here, demonstrates the fact that we've got a real-time output. Looks like we need to unpause our render target. But with a little bit of delay, we've actually got another preview of what we're seeing here. And for those of you that might be joining the dots already, this means that we can then send this to any program that receives NDI. So this is just an example of one program that receives NDI. But I also have this Dome Viewer program, which you can download from here. It's by Prefrontal Cortex Dometools. I'll link this in the description, but it's a great Dome preview application. Just download this. Standalone application made in Unity, and it takes an NDI source, outputs it to a Dome example. Maybe what I'll do is put this over here. Up here. Can I run Unreal over the top? Yeah. Okay, so if we change this output type to Dome master, we keep the NDI source just running, and we look for it here. NDI. And then let's see, minimize this. Yeah, so we can see a different output type that we can preview, and this is in a kind of dome format. So this is kind of great because you could, in theory, imagine that you're sitting. Yeah, sitting in a dome, and this way you can really angle your shots, get an idea for how your shots should be looking right off the bat. So best way to demonstrate this. With our little window here, we could say that in terms of the dome, this needs to be a lot higher. So we can quite quickly make iterations on that. Be like, oh yeah, this should definitely be more like this. Let's keyframe that instead. Obviously, having multiple machines, multiple screens is going to be better for this, but the demo, we can then see that our changes to the shot have been made. We can preview that in a dome. Same totally goes for previewing in a headset. We can use apps like this, VR NDI, and this will enable you to receive your input map type and then just view it in a headset in real time. So the implications for that, for previewing, are just incredible. A lot better than doing blockouts, rendering really, really high res scenes, redoing it over and over again. So I'm really excited about that workflow. I think it's really clever that we can output like that. I think it would reduce kind of redrafting times massively. So back to rectangular in here. Another massive thing that this kind of just undo. There we go. So as well as the exposure being, something that you can only really experience in a headset. So it's well worth previewing in NDI as you go, rather than iterating every time you render. So that exposure, you're only going to know how bright this is to the headset because the projectors onto the lenses in the headset are going to have their own luminance. It's going to, I would say, even though this looks dark to my monitor, it's probably going to be a bit less dark in the headset. So this kind of stuff is well worth previewing as you go along. Another thing that's well worth previewing is the height that you're working at, because this can have a massive impact on your sense of scale. Something really interesting about this map is that I only realized how big it's intended to be. I only realized this after watching a talk on the design of this level, and they mentioned how this guy is actually here at the entrance, and he's the one that really seals the deal, shows you the actual scale of all of this. I would have never thought that it's supposed to be this big. This is like ground level. This is like human height. I would have never known that if it wasn't for this indicator here, this character. So you're actually supposed to be walking around at this kind of height. As you get here, you're looking up at these massive great pillars that are definitely built by, giants or something. So in these kind of 3D levels, it's all relative, isn't it? So actually, it's really important to get the height off the ground correct, because I was probably going to say people would probably come in about this height, and then you actually lose a lot of the sense of scale because of that. Again, this is something you really want to preview in headset because you only truly get a sense of how high up you are when previewed in a headset or in your other immersive media format. So, we can use the camera preview. Yeah, we can totally use the equirectangular output preview, but it's not going to give you an exact sense of how high off the ground you are. It's actually really hard to tell. So using that NDI output again is just incredibly useful to make all the difference for your kind of keyframing, for your sequencing, for your animation. So essentially that's the crux of it, really singing the praises of this NDI output preview. I think it's incredibly useful. But what we could look into is just say we've made it into sorry, let's figure out a better way to control this height. So let's say that this is the correct height now. We know what height we're working at. I'm actually gonna pause this again, go back to the viewport rendering. I'll just raise the exposure a little bit just for the sake of this. Oh, sorry. Just for the sake of this preview, let's work at this kind of exposure because we're talking about height now. That would do. Okay, so we know this is the right height. We want it to be looking forward. Go back to here. I mean, like coming down in, like we're sort of floating in the air, so coming down to ground level, that kind of makes sense. As we get to here, we've still got that higher kind of keyframe. So we can just figure out what our height keyframe is, which was this Z value. We can kind of delete that, or we can copy the keyframe over, which will have the same effect. So now we know we're like working at consistent height, and it's kind of realistic, feels like you're, walking. So let's move this up to like 1200. Let's say we're getting towards, let me just unpause, let me just pause this again. Okay. So remembering to pause this render target really helps because then you can work at a nice FPS. So let's carry this all the way through to here and say we've got like a corner coming up. So corners can be kind of tricky in VR because, like we said, due to the kind of the fact that the viewer wants to be turning their head themselves, the actual head turns that you kind of force need to be kind of subtle, not too much. I'm just noticing a bit of drift there to the right, so so it might be this keyframe as well. I follow that line as accurately as possible. And we'll just do location only. Cool, so that's feeling okay. So yeah, like minimizing the rotation is really key. Again, just to stop having a nauseating effect on the viewer as much as anything. So then keeping the keyframes to a minimum is really useful. So what I would do is probably just go to the final point of any corner. We've got the rotation and the location for that. Oops, didn't do the rotation. Keyframe all the transforms. not do that? Keyframe transform. Yeah, there you go. Cool, and then we need this rotation to be the same from here. I'm just going to alt drag those keyframes. Cool. We're going from here to here. Make sure our rotation is kind of full. So we're ready to then do another straight line at the end of this. And then so it feels kind of skiddy. So this is where kind of turning a little more, coming out a bit more, keyframing that. Just want to make sure we get like a nice smooth line. So what needs to happen here is just the rotation can happen a little earlier. And it should really just be the yaw only. So we can delete all the pitch. Maybe past this point, delete any pitch keyframes. And that's kind of already looking a bit tidier. I think let's see. I think it just does need to come out a bit wider or a bit further back. But it really is just thinking about keeping this stuff really, really smooth. Really smooth, really consistent, not too much change, unless you're going for that feel. But for the most part, in VR, you want to be controlling the kind of motion very, very carefully, or else, again, it's going to have a nauseating effect on the viewer. So yeah, that's kind of working for me. I prefer using these kind of keyframes rather than using a camera rig rail. It can be done, but I don't like using it so much. But you know, maybe we could look into that in a future video. But you know, again, thinking about pacing, these keyframes need to like have an equal distance away, or if the actual distance is further, then they need to be further away. So it's just thinking about it not speeding up or slowing down too much as it passes these keyframes as well. Which I think it does slow down a bit, but I'm okay with it. And then we could look at a final keyframe, which could be kind of coming to this point. And what this has done is it's brought up another interesting problem here, is that we have like this clip space here. Let's see if that's clipping in the 360 output. It's not actually, but if we were sort of closer to the ground, say we were this close, what you can do is bring the near clip plane in. So that will fix that. It's a little tip for if that stuff is clipping. But yeah, essentially, then we could kind of end our render at this point where we see the kind of final image. But essentially that covers some of the main points that I wanted to go into, where it's just so incredibly useful having this real-time preview, and not only just having it for a full render target, a full 360 view of what's on the screen, but also this NDI sending out, because you are really going to get so much better of a feel if you're viewing this stuff in your headset from the start. You don't want to make a whole sequence, render it out, then realize it's not quite right. So this kind of prototyping, although you're working at these kind of lower frame rates, it's just incredibly useful to have this real-time preview out. So yeah, also just going by some stuff that I'll link in the description, the meta kind of tips are really, really useful for VR filmmaking. Yeah, all these tips, incredibly useful. We'll have some documentation as well coming out. And then also totally sending out via NDI, previewing in any of these NDI preview apps. Incredibly, incredibly useful, very important for getting this prototyping done at an early stage. So yeah, that's some good tips for how you might make sure your stuff is looking good during your sequencing, during your animation. I think in a future stream, it'd be great to go into getting some really good high-res renders out of this. What kind of machine can do what kind of render, and then some measures you can take to actually get really, really high res out of actually some more basic machines. Because of our we've got a kind of tiling method now, so you actually aren't so much bound by what your GPU can do in one big chunk. We can split it into smaller chunks. So there's some sequencing tips here, some things you might want to consider in terms of the exposure and the animation and the pacing and the height as well. But there's also the output to consider, so we can go into that in our next video. As I say, these are kind of weekly hangouts in our Discord server where I run through a little workflow like this, and then we can open it up to any kind of discussion and any specific questions as well. So our Discord is a great place to share information and thoughts about how to get the best out of 360 renders and compositing. But yeah, you're welcome to share your screen, share any ideas on a Wednesday as well. So yeah, I hope to see you there, and thanks for tuning in this time. And yeah, every week we'll be diving into more useful tips on getting the best out of immersive media in general. So yeah, thanks a lot, and catch you soon. Cheers.